The Mystery at Number 6 by Augusta Hoyle Seaman. Chapter 5 A Quest in the Night. As things turned out, they did not even have to encounter the returning pair, who were so long in arriving that Sydney finally remarked, "Well, I don't know what's keeping the mule express, but I don't see any object in our hanging around here any longer. Let's get in the car and drive out to the main road through that other trail that leads in here. It isn't quite as good, but we can manage it, and there's no sense in just waiting to be discovered here." This route they accordingly took, but so great was their curiosity as to the cause of the delay that Sydney got out when they were a safe distance away, and went back to the main trail to reconnoitre. He came back in a few moments to say that apparently the cart had broken down about half a mile from the pool, and that when he had peeped through the bushes, he saw the Cracker woman and Delight both trying to patch it up, and Jerry sitting perfectly motionless and silent in the wagon. Evidently, from the little conversation he heard, the man had begun to feel ill while in town, and they had decided to come home without staying as long as they had planned. Sydney said he would have liked to go out and offer them some assistance, but concluded that the girl would only have been worried and embarrassed by it, and accordingly he slipped away without being seen. "So that's that," he finished, and Bernice occupied the journey home retailing to him her half-enlightening and half-baffling conversation with Delight at the pool. "It's curious," commented Sydney when she had finished. "The more you learn about that situation, the more tangled up it becomes. I thought it was pretty simple at first, and that you were entirely mistaken in your guesses. But now I agree with you. It certainly is a puzzle." They drove the rest of the way home in silence, except when Bernice once exclaimed, Why, if she's so fond of her Uncle Jerry, is she so afraid of him, or of them? I can't understand it." But Sydney did not attempt to elucidate what was just as much of a mystery to him. One idea only occurred to him. "I believe I'll hunt up Ike Massey again," he suddenly exclaimed. "Do you remember that night when we got to talk to him in the Orange Blossom Cafe? He broke off just before he had finished, and I've always had a notion that he knows something more than he's told us already. I'm going to look him up in the cafe again tonight." That evening Sydney was as good as his word, but he came back very soon to find Bernice on the hotel veranda and tell her that he had not been successful in locating Ike at the cafe, but had learned that he was supposed to be fishing that evening at number 3. As it would later be a bright moonlight night, he announced that he intended to take the Ford and hunt up Ike, as much for the fun of the thing as anything else. "Oh, Sid," cried Bernice, "do take me with you. I know Mother won't mind. I'll go and ask her right now. I do so love a drive at night here, and we do it so seldom." "All right, go and ask her. And first I'll take you to see that new mine, number 18, at work. You've never seen one of the mines at night, and it's something of a sight." 10 minutes later they were bowling over the asphalt roads in a sweet-scented Florida night. The moon had not yet risen, but there was a faint glow in the east, indicating that it was near the horizon. Their way lay across a flat marsh waste, with here and there a tall, lovely pine heavily draped with Spanish moss. Strange-sounding frogs croaked in the marshes, croaked with such a different sound from the frogs of the north that Bernice could never really believe there were frogs at all. At intervals a mockingbird somewhere across the marshes lilted entrancingly, and a whippoorwill mourned in another quarter. Suddenly, on rounding a sharp turn in the road, Bernice looked ahead and caught her breath. "Oh, Sid, what is that?" It was indeed a peculiar sight, looming up in the midst of this deserted wilderness. A great edifice brilliantly lighted with electric lights stood out against the dark sky. It resembled amazingly a scenic railway in an amusement park, and one almost expected to hear a brass band accompanied by the shouts of pleasure-seekers. Alongside of this edifice was a sight equally amazing. From an immense hole in the earth like a volcanic crater there rolled swirling clouds of steam, weirdly illuminated by a number of strong searchlights playing on it from different points of the excavation. It made the resemblance to an active volcanic crater even more startling. "There's number 18, replied Sydney. "That brilliantly lighted affair is the washer. It used to wash the sand out of the phosphate, or the phosphate out of the sand. The other thing's the mine. We'll go over and look at her working." He ran the car off the road and across the stubbly field till they came to the outskirts of the works. Here they left the car and walked to the edge of the great pit. "I've never dreamed such a sight," sighed Bernice, gazing over the rim. "Those men look like demons crawling around in there in an awful muddle of steam and mud and confusion. And see those walls of the mine breaking down where that great pipe of water is trained on them." "That's the water drill," commented Sydney. "They get at the material that way." "And what's that huge hill of sand off to the side?" questioned Bernice. "That's what they call the overburden. The phosphate doesn't lie right at the surface. It begins about 10 or 15 feet further down, and all the top layer has to be removed first. So they shovel it off and leave it there at the side. But come, Bernice, we can't stay here all night. I want to get over to number 3. It's about a mile from here. I don't want to miss Ike." "Just to think," murmured Bernice, as they scrambled back to the car, "that beautiful, quiet, deserted number 6 was just such a sight as this once. I can hardly believe it." "It is some contrast," acknowledged Sydney. "And it's just as hard to believe that some day in the not-so-distant future this will look just about like number 6 also. Can you believe that?" As they resumed the road and drove on to number 3, the moon rose, a great circle, red as a conflagration, immense in size. And when they at last approached number 3, a pool very close to the roadside, the night had become almost as brilliant as day. On the opposite bank, backed by a grove of moss-draped live oaks, they beheld a dark, still figure, patiently sitting on the bank beside a stationary fishing rod or two. "There's Ike," whispered Sydney. "Now the problem is, how to get over there close to him without having him think we've deliberately hunted him up. If once he gets the notion we're after him for any special reason, and particularly if he thinks we're too much interested in number 6, I'm afraid he'll begin to be troublesome." "Hadn't we better just sit here a while and act as if we were looking at the moonlight in the pool? Then later you can appear to recognize him and call over to him." "Good idea!" exclaimed Sydney. "You have him sometimes. We'll do just the thing." They sat for 10 minutes in the quiet spell of the moonlight. Several times a big fish jumped clear out of the water and fell back into the pool, creating 1,000 silver ripples. The odor of jasmine mingled keenly with the many other scents wafted to them across the pool. So poignant was the witchery of the night that they hated to mar it by so much as a whisper. But at last it was Ike himself who broke the spell. "Hey there!" he called across to them. "Got such a thing as a sharp knife with you? I dropped mine in the pool a while back." The interruption was fortunate, and Sydney shouted back lustily, "Hello! That you, Ike? Sure, I have a knife. We'll come round there to you, for I know you don't want to leave your lines." And when they had picked their way around to where he sat, "Who'd have thought of coming across you here? Had any luck?" "We were out for a drive and stopped to watch the fish jumping in this pool." "They don't jump nowheres near me," grumbled Ike. "Nor bite either, for that matter. I've tried every side." "What's the matter?" asked Sydney. "Seems just the right sort of night for him." "Dunno. Maybe that's the matter." And Ike pointed to a curious dark object, much resembling a long floating log to one side of the pool. Then he took up an old bicycle lantern that he carried with him and pointed it directly at the log. "Stand right behind me," he commanded Bernice, "and look over my shoulder." She did as he bade her, and presently beheld 2 blazing points of light steadily approaching the bank on which they stood. "Oh, what is it?" she whispered breathlessly. "Just old Mr. Gator," laughed Ike. Bernice gave a little scream of terror, and the points of light disappeared. "He couldn't have hurt you. The bank's 15 feet steep just here. Besides that, I'd have shot him first if he'd tried to get up. I think that rascal's been laying for the fish all evening. That's why they don't bite. If I'd a mind to shoot him, I'd maybe get $1 for his hide. He's a big feller. It's too much trouble to skin him." "Oh, let's get away from here, Sid," whispered Bernice, still shuddering. She could not yet understand their callousness to the danger of this, to her, terrible monster. But Sydney only laughed and said to Ike, "She's scared to death of him. Today we saw that kid over at old number 6 having a regular romp with one, and I thought Bernice would go into a convulsion." "You seem to be over to number 6 quite a bit," commented Ike, making a fresh cast with one of his rods. This was precisely what Sydney wanted. "Yeah, we've been over there several times lately," he replied. "Fishing's generally good there, and Bernice here likes to see the girl. They sort of chum together while I fish. Queer little kid she is." Ike made no response to this, but dug into an old tin can for another worm. Sydney tried not to appear desirous of a reply, and whittled a stick nonchalantly. Presently Ike deigned to speak. "If you've managed to make any of that outfit talk, you've done more than I can. Since the day I first saw that there cracker woman, I've never managed to get hardly so much of the time of day from the lot. I seen Jerry one morning prowling round catching something for breakfast, I suppose, and I thought I'd have a chat and find out a few things about the Glades from him, but bless you, he just nodded and wouldn't talk no more'n an oyster. I tell you there's something queer about that outfit. Take from me, Jerry's got something up his sleeve, or my name ain't Ike Massey. He's hiding, that's what he is." "What do you suppose he's hiding for?" demanded Sydney, inwardly delighted at this sudden outburst of Ike's. A sly look, visible even in the moonlight, came over the man's face. "He's got a reason, don't you worry. What do you suppose that kid is they have tagging around with him?" "I don't know, do you?" demanded Sydney. This was better than he had even dared to hope, and even Bernice forgot the alligator for a moment and pricked up her ears. "You suppose that kid belongs to him?" hissed Ike, his face close to Sydney. "I hadn't thought much about it. Why shouldn't she?" Sydney led him on. "She ain't no more like either of them than a mullet is like a shark, that's why. Oh, I've been studying the situation a bit. I ain't blind. And it's my firm belief that Jerry stole that gal, sometime or other, and is just hiding away here until everything's safe, and then he's going to get a ransom for her. You see if I ain't right." "That's nonsense," laughed Sydney, but at the same time he pinched Bernice's arm until she almost cried aloud. "No, 'tain't nonsense either. If it ain't that, it's something just as bad." He commenced to reel up his lines with determination. "But I ain't gonna waste any more time here tonight. Was out all last night anyway, and I need some sleep. You ain't going back to town? So I'd thank you for a lift." "Sure thing. Come right along," cried Sydney. "We ought to have been back some time ago." Ike gathered up his belongings, and they all moved round the pool to the road where the car stood, Bernice casting many a backward look at the log-like forms still floating in the moonlight. The ride home was uneventful, as Ike on the back seat was both sleepy and uncommunicative, but he thanked them warmly for the ride when they had entered the village, and they left him at the door of his own tumble-down shack. "What do you think of it? Wasn't it worth while?" demanded Sydney excitedly, as they reached the hotel porch. "I don't know what to think. How about you, Sid?" "Well, I'll admit that same idea has occurred to me more than once, but it seemed too extravagant, somehow. I just can't seem to credit those two with any such scheme as that about the kid, and yet it certainly is one explanation." "There's one big objection to it, the very thing she told us this afternoon," declared Bernice. "If such a thing were the case, would she be likely to be so fond of that Jerry as she says she is?" "No," Sydney had to admit. "I'll have to acknowledge. It doesn't seem likely." End of chapter 5.